Welcome to the Disrupt Your Career podcast, brought to you by Claire Harbour
and Antoine Tirard. We're passionate about helping everyone find fulfillment in their work life.
We believe that big, messy, uncharted career changes are inevitable, and it's up to you to decide.
Will you take control and disrupt, or allow yourself to be disrupted?
We wrote the book about it, and now we share here our conversations with other thinkers in this crucial area.
Settle down and get ready to listen to this dose of wisdom.
So, on this time's episode of the Disrupt Your Career podcast, I'm really happy to be inviting and being joined by Julian Lighton. Julian is a Silicon Valley-based executive coach. He's a strategist and an author who helps leaders navigate complexity, growth, and career transition with greater clarity and intentionality. Drawing on decades as a C-suite operator himself, an entrepreneur and an advisor, his work combines strategic rigor with deep human insight. Julian, thank you so much for joining me.
It's an absolute pleasure, Claire. Thank you.
Good. So, as I've already said, you've had a remarkably varied career. You've been in law, you've been in consulting, you've been a leader in a Fortune 100 organization, you've been an entrepreneur, you're coaching. Looking back, what's the common thread? What is it that connects all that you've done?
It sounds awfully pat, but curiosity is really the common thread. And that curiosity showed up for me in originally being very interested in how human relationships were negotiated or contracted, and then became more about problem solving, and then became more about decision making, and eventually became more about making sense of reality. How do we individually understand what is going on, and how do we get better at being able to deal with that reality and more successful in pursuit of whatever our goals are?
That sounds like a beautiful line of progressive evolution. I bet it wasn't quite as smooth and pretty as you're summarizing it post facto. But share a little more, if you will, about how this career unfolded. I mean, to what extent was it serendipity? To what extent was it planned? Give us a picture that makes you a little more human than the one you've just picked, in which case you were a genius and you had these lines.
Well, one doesn't want to play it down, but it was a series of fortunate events. I have made my partial reputation, partial competence being in the room where it happens, to quote Hamilton. I was very, very good as a youngster at being able to blag. It used to be called back in the 1980s and 1990s. So I kind of pushed myself to the front of the line, and I was always interested in kind of hanging out where the decisions got made. And so when I left university, I decided I didn't want to be a barrister, mostly because it was, back in those days, a very dead man's shoes operation. You join chambers with a bunch of other folks and you stay there for the next 30, 40 years. And that just wasn't really what I wanted to do. I wanted to be much more entrepreneurial. And so I joined a startup in the days when there were no startups. And I learned how to be plucky and adaptable and flexible, because you kind of had to in, the late 1980s, where there was no money for startups. And I got my hands on technology pretty early in my career. I hadn't touched a computer until I left university. So that led me to kind of, okay, how do you solve problems with technology and with people? So I ended up going from the startup to Anderson Consulting and seeing things in a very, very, very big structured environment. Taught me a lot about discipline and about standardization and about performance management. And then I took a left turn at Albuquerque. I went on vacation to see my cousin in San Francisco in 1994. And it wasn't difficult to figure out that the streets were metaphorically, if not literally, paved with technology gold. And so I applied myself. I went back home. I sat in the British Library. I pulled a list from the San Francisco Chronicle of all of the top 200 odd companies in the Bay Area, and I applied to all of them. Said, hey, I'm going to be in town in another 6 weeks if you're interested and you're looking for managers, hire me. I ended up getting hired by a management consultancy called Cambridge Technology Partners. Again, luck. So the world's first publicly quoted management consultancy, and I ended up running their San Francisco office. So I went from running project teams at Anderson, 6 or 7 people, to running an organization of about 50 people and having a P&L. And I had no training to do so, and so it was a figure it out. So the grand old age of 28, there I was, like, okay, we're going to have to build a demand funnel and keep these people employed and occupied. But luckily, even a frozen turkey can fly in a hurricane, Claire. So in those days, there was a lot of good, fun things to do, and enjoyed my time at CTP. CTP blew up in 1999. We missed a couple of quarters, and being a public company, the market punished us. Our stock went from 68 down to 12, and my ability to buy a small tropical island disappeared in a puff of smoke. And so I zagged instead of zigged, and I went to McKinsey because I wanted to figure out what happened. Like, I was supposed to be one of the smartest guys in the room. So how did this happen to me? And I spent the next 3 years focused on how do companies grow, learning from some of the smartest and some of the best folks around. I had a great pulpit to watch companies at different sizes, all the way from the Microsofts of the world down to pure startups. And from 99 to 2001, that was a pretty interesting time to be in the Valley.
Oh, yeah.
Again, to watch what growth is like, right? So I learned a lot of lessons. And then in 2001, McKinsey wouldn't let me build a firm of my own. I wanted to start solving problems around information services and analytics. So I left and I went to a big company that was going to let me build a portfolio of new ventures. So into Hitachi, and did a portfolio reorganization for them, sold off about 30 companies, raised about $7 billion and reinvested it in software and services. My wife hated living in Tokyo and wanted nothing to do with that. And so she said, I'm getting back on a plane to California, and either you're coming or you're not. And so, being a sensible chap, I got on the plane. And by total chance, I'd written an article whilst I was at McKinsey for the McKinsey Quarterly on how companies were organizing to grow, but in a different way. There was a book by a guy called John Hagel called Unbundling the Corporation, where he posited that people were basically taking organizations apart and, by using outsourcing, smart sourcing, rearranging themselves in kind of network-based organizations. And I wrote this article about examples of that: Cisco, Amazon, Schwab, eBay, et cetera, et cetera. John Chambers, who was running Cisco, got hold of a copy and invited me in to talk to his staff for lunch. I thought nothing more of it. And then 2 weeks later, he called me back and said, hey, are you interested in building something for me? And you kind of don't say no to John. So that was my start at Cisco. I spent the next 12 years there, running a variety of P&Ls, again, all just moving from thing to thing to thing. So originally I ran a services division, which we built from scratch, which is a couple of $100 million. And then I ran a geography, which was emerging markets, Latin America, Middle East, Africa, Central and Eastern Europe, and Russia and the former Soviet Union. So about 136 countries, about $4.5 billion in revenue. And latterly, I was the head of enterprise marketing. And so did a cycle of business unit, geography, and function. So learned those things. It's like playing a game of Trivial Pursuit, Claire. Like, you're trying to fill in your little
you're filling
chunks
your
of cheese. And
yeah.
The only other job I wanted at Cisco was head of strategy. And there was a guy who was my age, and he was very, very good, and he wasn't going anywhere. And so I took a call from a headhunter and started the next stage of my career. So if the first stage of consulting was all about advising, being a very good advisor and being able to develop a problem ahead of people, then the second stage was all about being an operator. So actually making decisions and being accountable and responsible. The third stage was all about collaboration. And so I went from trying to get my thing done to trying to get our thing done. And I did 4 public company gigs as a head of strategy and corporate development. took 2 companies public, 2 companies private, and did a bunch of other work with some large private equity players, Hellman and Friedman and Providence Equity and Francisco, et cetera. And that brings us to 2021. And then I fed up, right? I've been doing this for 30 years. I just said, okay, I don't want to do this anymore.
What was the moment that made you realize that?
Well, I don't think it was a moment. I think it was a progressive, both there was a negative and a positive. So there was a negative of, I don't want to do these things anymore. I'm re-experiencing myself too often. And there was a positive of, there is a different way in which I can actually do something that I want more. And that different way of doing something was my coming across coaching and also coming across the career of Bill Campbell, who had, been the head of sales at Apple, the CEO at Intuit, and then coached Eric Schmidt and a bunch of the CEOs in the Valley. And I'm like, I want to be like that guy. So I've done all of this stuff. I think I've got qualifications. I'm going to do the coaching thing and see whether it works. And I want to try and be like that guy, mostly because, using a fishing metaphor, I didn't want to fish anymore. I didn't want to teach people to fish. I just wanted to go fishing. And so how could I do that? How could I be in the room and be useful? And so my last 5 years have been about that. I've been hanging out with either CEOs or C-suites or boards and trying to help them make better decisions.
So when you think of that particular transition that you so neatly described as wanting to be going fishing, what did becoming coach require of you to let go personally?
2 things, one more obvious than the other. The more obvious one is basically not having to have the answer and not having to feel responsible, but just actually trying to be helpful, being of service. The second one, the more personal one, is really an identity thing, Claire, of not having to try too hard. I've been a hustler. I've been at the front of the queue. I've been a make it happen to don't do that. And identifying yourself, the earlier version of me, letting go of that and becoming more of a senior, more of a sage, more wisdom than brute forcing it, is an interesting change in identity.
Definitely. What's been hardest about it?
Well, I think this is true of a lot of people in their careers, that you get really good at something and you want to exercise that thing.
Yeah. And you get known for it. And then
you get known for it. Right. I mean, for like 15 years, I was one of the kind of 10 or 15 guys in the Valley. If you wanted to figure out something in gaming or digital media and you wanted to buy a company or turn it around, et cetera, then I was on that call list. And that's what I was used to doing. And you got to go from that's what you're doing to I'm not actually doing any of that. I'm not going to take those calls anymore. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up shop on the side of the river. And if people want to come and talk to me about how to make better decisions or how to solve problems or how to think about their relationships with people, then that's great. But that's a very, very different thing. And assuming that identity and being comfortable in it has been an interesting ride.
Interesting for you. And as you say, it's a struggle for most. And you've recently written a book called Navigating Your Next, which is very deliberately titled, I think. Why do you think it is that so many leaders do struggle with the question of what's next?
So that has actually puzzled me for more than 30 years. And is one of the reasons why I wrote the book. Why do some people succeed and others not? It's not talent. We've known lots and lots of talented people, but that doesn't mean anything. And interestingly, it's not motivation, right? There are lots and lots of highly motivated people in the world, and that doesn't get you there. So what is it, right, that makes the difference in terms of figuring it out? And essentially, it comes down to a very few things. And I had to reflect on my own career on my friends, on all the people that I worked with. I had to go and kind of talk to a bunch of people who were trying to figure this out. So I do a lot of work for McKinsey and coaching their partners and associates. And one of the major things that they are trying to figure out as generalists is, what am I actually going to do? Essentially, I'm not going to be here forever. So what am I going to do? And what does that mean? As I said, it comes down to several pretty basic things, one of which is, what do you actually want? And what do you want is not just a career question, it's a life question.
Absolutely.
And Oprah said it better than me. So she was interviewed by Trevor Noah a couple of years ago. And Trevor Noah asked her the question, said, you've interviewed just about anybody who's been successful over the last 30 years in any walk of life. What's the single thing that you've taken away about why they're successful? She said, because they know what they want. You can't get what you want unless you know what you want. So I started with that as a precept. Is that true? Let's go and actually look and see whether that is true. And it turns out, yes, it absolutely is. Basically, what we do is who we are, particularly for men. So doing is being is doing, work is identity. And so the thing that you've got to figure out is who you are. And the way you figure that out is, what are you actually going to do? And so there's this interesting little puzzle that comes up, and it changes as you go through life. So Frederick Hudson wrote the book, The Adult Years, and came up with this model that there are 4 major transitions in life: mid-late 20s about identity, mid-30s about moving from I to we in terms of how you're surrounded by your ecosystem of family and children, etc. Transition number 3 in your 40s, in search of passion and purpose and why are we all here. And transition number 4 is moving away from work. So if work has been my identity, right, I spent 90,000 hours, so roughly a third of my life on my career, then what am I going to be that's not that? So you've got 4 kind of inevitable things you go through, and through that lens, who am I? What am I? What do I want in these things? So do I want more family? Do I want more personal success? Do I want more achievement? Do I want more hobbies? Do I want more health? So it's a hugely configurable thing for each individual, and most people get confused by it. There's too much to do, and human beings are not good at being confused. So typically, if you're confused, your emotional volatility goes up and your rational capacity goes down and you feel stuck. And so there's an enormous amount of this that I looked around. I said, that's what's going on. Even really, really successful people in one factor reach these stages, and they suddenly have to transition, and they don't know how to. There's no method there. And so I wrote the book basically about, how do you understand how to navigate these transitions? How do you understand what you want? How do you figure out what your value proposition is? So why should you be doing that rather than somebody else? How do you go about getting it, right? The actual process of focus and execution. And then the most important one, number 5, which is really about, what does success look like for you? So most of the most successful people that I've ever met are some of the least happy.
Oh, yeah. Which would make us question whether they're actually successful.
What's the nature of success? Precisely. That's exactly right. Yes. So you can be very good at something, or you can be very rich, or you can be very powerful, or you can be very famous. But does that mean that you're successful? So success is very personal.
Of course.
So what does success mean to you? And therefore, what are you prepared to do to get it? One of the basic questions, or one of the basic differentiators in being successful, is that people have to say no. Successful people, on whatever way you want to measure success, are good at saying no.
A lot. Yes.
Right, a lot. And people who are not very good at getting what they want are not good at saying no. So either you prosecute your own agenda and you're willing to focus pretty radically, or you're not. And if you're not, then that is a big red flashing sign that you're pretty much never, unless by accident, going to get what you want.
Definitely. So I'm thinking a simple description of the arc is helping people move from confusion to clarity. And wouldn't the world be wonderful if everybody had clarity? But of course, most of us get stuck in sometimes genuine complexity and sometimes self-created noise, or noise that we choose to listen to even if we didn't create it ourselves. How do you help someone distinguish between genuine complexity? I'm thinking of a McKinsey partner surrounded by genuine complexity in many respects, and noise, and how do you help them to get to that point at which they truly reach clarity and see what success might look like for them?
Well, I'm going to have to charge you a lot of money for that, Claire.
I'm not asking you to do it for me. I know exactly. I don't need any help at all, sweetheart. But thank you.
The simplistic answer is we haven't really changed a lot in 40,000 years.
Absolutely.
So the degree of complexity has gone up, right? More volatility, more uncertainty, more complexity, et cetera, but we have not really changed. And the way human beings figure problems out, two sets of systems, one focused on default mode network, right? Wandering around, recognizing patterns and making decisions based on those patterns, what we've seen before. And then our second system based essentially on logical and emotional decision-making. So if that is true, when you come across lots and lots of complexity, unless you are very, very, very talented, it's highly unlikely that that mode is going to result in a good result for you. Just defaults out. Trying to use that way of decision-making just results in, again, emotional volatility, rational capacity going down, feeling stuck. So how can we do it? So first thing is actually just really focusing on what is going on. So the first thing that I talk to with people is what's actually happening for you so that they can figure out what is real versus what's not real. Is that actually true? There are a lot of stories that we carry around about what is going on and that confuse us. And so slowing the individual or the group down and asking, is that true? To get to some kind of reality. The second thing, and again, depending on whether it's an individual or whether it's a group, is what are we really trying to do? So don't try and do multiple things at once. Don't try and solve multiple problems. Try and solve a problem. And so what's the most important thing that you need to work on as an individual or a group? What's the thing, the lead pin in the bowling alley? What is that thing? Okay, great. So if that's reality and that's the thing that you really need to focus on, how would you actually make a decision? Could you do it inductively? Could you do it deductively? Could you do it bottoms up, tops down? Would you want to be emotional? Would you want to be rational? Any number of ways, but each individual has a particular way that they find useful in solving problems. So for instance, my version of doing this, when I looked at myself, I like lots of information. I like to take my time. I like to talk to other people, but not involve them in decisions themselves. I like to see decisions in patterns. I like not to be hassled, et cetera, et cetera. So that makes me good as a strategist, small number, high risk, high white space decisions. But it would make me a very bad day trader or a very bad factory manager or a very bad field commander. And so getting people to recognize how they make decisions, right? What conditions under which they make decisions properly allows them to relax, right? So all of that anxiety, that set of nerves drops away so they can see this is what reality is. This is the thing that's most important. This is the way I or we make decisions best. Let's apply that. Okay, now let's split two different sets of things. What can I control? What can I not control? Yeah, it sounds incredibly obvious, but in fact, it's amazingly important. What are the things that I actually can control in this situation? And what's the stuff that I can't? The stuff you can't control, don't worry about. The stuff you can control, that's where the focus and the execution comes in. I learned this very much at Cisco from John Chambers, is that in just about any business situation, it's not an absolute result that you're looking for. You're looking for a comparative result. So you have to be better than the other folks, right? There's the old story of the two people walking in the woods. They come across a bear, and one of them kneels down and pulls a pair of running shoes out of his backpack. And the other guy says, well, what are you doing? And he says, well, I just have to be faster than you because the bear's going to eat one of us. And so it's being the person with the running shoes, right? It's having a plan. It's being purposeful. It's being focused. So that's, I think, the way that I would say, no matter what it is in life, whether it's a business decision or a personal decision, there are better ways of coming to a decision your way.
That's fascinating. And it begs a question about organizations. You work, I work, Antoine works with CEOs and C-suites. Sometimes, if we're lucky, our work cascades down. But the reality is that in most organizations, there are an awful lot of other leaders to develop than the ones that we get to work with. And I'm wondering about, what do organizations typically still misunderstand about the incredible diversity of the way we develop, the way we grow, the way we make decisions about what's important or what success is? What are they still failing on that they could do better at?
You say still. Unfortunately, I think it's got worse.
Yeah, maybe it has. Go on, tell us more.
So one is that leaders have to be developed. There's this horrible thing in the Valley right now where, for better or worse, there are just a lot of people who have not enough life experience and not enough experience of ever running anything at scale, who just are saying, yes, I can. And just observably, you need to sit down and say, no, you can't. There is just so much FUD and so much manifestation. Leadership is not an art. It is not magic. It is not hocus pocus. It is absolutely a science. There are people who are better at it than others, but it is a learned skill.
It's a learned skill, without any doubt. For which we have a greater or lesser propensity, of course, but nevertheless, it's learned.
But it needs to be learned. It needs to be taught, and it needs to be learned. It needs to be developed. The crucial piece is development. We all need development in different ways based upon our innate or intrinsic habits, behaviors, practices, and leadership is basically a framework, right? So if you are going to try and get what you want, 90% of the time you're going to have to lead other people. And in leading other people, you have to go from I to we. That's the most crucial thing. And it's a huge failure in the Valley right now because people think that leading is all about, no, I'm a founder. I get what I want. No, 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 no. We get what we want. So most of the people in the Valley are managers at best. And in fact, a large number of them are just dictators. They are just bullying people using money and any other power.
Positional power.
Positional power to get what they want. So leadership, why is this a difficult thing? I think partially it became very trendy, right? You know, we're in late stage capitalism, late stage individualism. And so people have become very, very focused on the individual. And people have become very, very focused on youth, on being able to achieve things, you know, particularly in tech, younger and younger and younger. Not because it's a bad thing, but simply it's a focus. And I think that has led to less craft. People don't think of themselves in terms of apprentice, journeyman, mastery, learning something, having to develop, whether that's a skill like coding, or whether it's leadership, or whether it's management, different skill sets. And so I think that's one, is that people have forgotten that leadership needs to be developed and that it is a skill set. I think secondly, the people who are idolized and are heroes, you know, in our generation, most of them were great leaders. They really knew how to build organizations. A lot of the people who are now being idolized, particularly in the Valley, are not leaders. They are great founders, right? A founder is monomaniacal about getting what they want and is very controlling and is very in the details. Whereas a leader scales and delegates and allows people their influence, right? Lets that in. because it's we. We are going to achieve the mission. Not you're going to achieve my mission, but we are going to achieve the mission because it's shared. And I think that's become a huge thing in our techno-focused society as we idolize one and begin to frown on the other. And it's more difficult. To become a leader takes years. It takes practice and it takes failure. When I was coming up in the Valley in the 90s and the 2000s, you had to fail a lot. Human beings learn more from failure than they do from success. And so if you're going to navigate in my career, I failed more than I've succeeded. The record looks pretty good, but if you look underneath it, right, there's more failure than there is
there's lots of murky
success
stuff too.
on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And it's being able to see that and go through that process and be resilient enough and persistent and consistent and curious enough to be able to grow and people letting you doing it. Now, are you allowed to fail is part of the problem. I have this long-going beef with HR departments. Show me an HR department that measures failure. No, we measure success.
And yet, if you measure failure correctly, you can turn it into a good, not a bad.
Precisely. So if you're the keepers of the holy cup of development, of talent, of resources, then on what basis are you hiring people? Interesting, right? So if you only ever hire people that are successful, what happens when they fail? If you don't know how to develop people, don't have any programs, don't fund them, don't even understand what real development is, then how do you expect to have leaders that are resilient and consistent and persistent, etc.? I just think, we've reached a point in modern management where we're bifurcating into different kind of religious groups, right? It's the Monty Python, the Shuites and the Gordites. Unfortunately, I think there are going to be some very unfortunate, unexpected results out of all of this, particularly when it's exacerbated by AI and by economics. It's only going to get worse. But in answer to your primary question, leadership is a skill. It needs to be developed, and it has to be proactively developed, and people learn through trying and failing.
So I'm thinking, first of all, just picking up on your conclusion that these failures, to recognize the gap between what they think of development and what they actually do, could lead to unexpected results. I'm not sure how unexpected they really will be. Scarily predictable in some respects, but just not very savory to think about.
So certainly unsavory. They're just being a little myopic.
Yes, precisely.
When you have some of the leading voices in the Valley, some of the leading minds like Andreessen saying, you don't need to reflect. Reflection is not part of leadership. I mean, what do you think is going to happen? It's certainly a predictor, certainly a red flag.
Definitely.
I think there are a few people who are holding out for people-centric, human-centered leadership. Again, if you're going to get stuff done, you're going to have to do it with and through other people, which means that you're going to have to be good at relationships. Not founder mode telling people what to do, not replacing them with AI, but actually helping them get better. If you go back to Drucker's view on leadership, we're talking about the 1960s, 1970s, Drucker's view on leadership is a leader improves the people around them. They create a better outcome than those people would have got on their own. So in what way am I, as a coach, helping create better outcomes, not for me, for them, for the teams, for the individuals that I'm sitting with? That becomes the yardstick that I think we need to go back to a great deal in terms of how am I in service of a better outcome for us? What does that mean? What can I do? In what role, in what structure do I have to play to help that happen?
Thank you for that. That's important. Let's now flip back to the 17-year-old Julian. If you could have a word with him today, and you hadn't done all the things you've done by this stage at that point, what would you want to tell young Julian?
I think there are multiple young Julians because you're really trying to figure out what you're going to do. So one of the things that I would say is do what you're good at. Now, luckily, I mostly did that, but I would really say it, figure out what you're good at and really lean into that. If you are a human being and you're competent at something, you pretty rapidly figure out how to practice it, and it gives you a lot of confidence. Think musicians, sports people, etc., etc. Now, you need some help. You need coaching. Everybody does. But most people who are good at something, it gives them an enormous purpose, sense of self, sense of identity, lots of confidence. And so I would say to me, don't worry about all the rest of the noise. Drink less, chase girls less, concentrate on doing what you're good at, and really enjoy that. Going back to the success question, one of the things that I have learned by going around and talking to everybody is that people don't enjoy the journey enough. No matter who is successful, like, I sat down with the Zuckerbergs, with the Ellisons, with the Ballmers, the Gates, Chambers, like all these guys. And one of the things that they talk about is the journey and who they were on the journey with. And it's only in reflection that they actually talk about it. And they say, if I'd have known, I would have enjoyed what I was doing. I would have enjoyed the time more. And so I think the second thing I would say is not only focus on what you're good at, but enjoy it. Enjoy the ride, because time is irrevocably moving in one direction. It's a very interesting paradox that, I'm 58 and I sit here and think about the things that I didn't do, power of regret. And then the things that I did, I reminisce about the people that I spent time with. So I think the second thing I would say is the journey is that I would say to that individual, to me, whether the 14-year-old me or the 17-year-old me or the 25-year-old me, is really, really, really focus on what you're good at, let the other stuff go, and really, really, really enjoy the ride a lot more.
Thank you. That's simple, but hard-hitting. Thank you. Julian, it's been a real pleasure having you chat with me for this time. I know we could go on for hours, but podcasts don't love going on for hours. So let's call it a day there with great thanks and gratitude. I know the audience is going to love this one. And of course, we'll have all the links to books and all the good stuff. Thank you once again for taking part.
It's an absolute pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed hearing from this month's guest as much as we did.
Do go and check out our work on disrupt-your-career.com and come back soon. Thank you.